"Don't touch that, that's for Evan's family." My hand was still on the refrigerator door when my daughter said it, not asked. Said, like I was a visitor who had overstayed, like I needed permission in a house I helped pay for. I slowly turned around. Lydia was standing near the kitchen island, arms crossed, phone in one hand, expression tight but polished, the same expression she uses in boardrooms when she wants to shut someone down without raising her voice. "Mom," she continued, carefully enunciating each word, "my in-laws are coming for dinner. Everything needs to look intentional." Intentional. I had spent $186.42 that morning on those groceries. I knew the exact amount because I used to run payroll for an entire municipality. Numbers don't slip past me. I remember totals. I remember signatures. I remember who contributed what. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. Behind Lydia, Evan, my son-in-law, stepped into the kitchen. Calm, measured, architect posture, shoulders straight, voice low. "If Lydia said leave it, Gloria, just leave it," he added. "We're hosting. In the house I had wired $60,000 into. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel small in your own space, pause right here, because what happened next didn't start that night. It started years before. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why silence can be louder than screaming. But before we go further, if you believe women should never feel like guests in their own homes, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Now let me take you back. I'm Gloria Whitman, 70 years old, widowed 8 years, former municipal payroll supervisor, which means I've signed more checks in my lifetime than most people will ever see. I am not impulsive, I am not careless, and I am not naive, but I am soft-spoken. And soft-spoken women are often mistaken for weak. That mistake is going to matter later. That evening, I closed the refrigerator gently. "Of course," I said, "I wouldn't want to disturb anything." I smiled. And that smile would confuse them later. Lydia relaxed slightly, satisfied. She turned back to her phone, probably adjusting table lighting for photos. Presentation matters to her. Optics. Stability must be secured early, she says that often. Evan began rearranging platters I had already prepared. They didn't yell. They didn't insult me. That's the thing about modern disrespect. It arrives dressed as practicality. I went upstairs without another word. Not because I was hurt, but because something shifted. You see, 8 years ago when my husband passed, I sold the small brick house we'd owned for 32 years. Paid off, safe, quiet. Lydia had insisted I move in with them. "It's smarter financially, Mom," she said. "Why keep capital locked in a dated property? We can leverage it into something bigger, something better for all of us." Leverage. I wired the $60,000 down payment. I remember sitting at the bank, signing the transfer authorization. My hands steady, my heart hopeful. I asked only one thing: "My name will be on the deed, right?" Lydia had laughed softly. "Of course, Mom, it's our family home." Family home. Numbers don't lie, but people do. Downstairs, I could hear Lydia instructing Evan about centerpiece placement. "Mom tends to move things," she said quietly, but not quietly enough. "Tends to move things," as if I were unpredictable. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking around the room they call mine. It fits a bed, a dresser, and one chair. Everything else in the house reflects Lydia's aesthetic: minimalist, intentional. Curated, including me. An hour later, Darlene Ross arrived, Evan's mother. Perfume first, then voice. "Oh, Lydia, this place looks stunning," she said. "You've really made it yours." Made it yours. I wonder if she knew, or maybe she did. Darlene is status conscious in a way that feels practiced. She once told Lydia, "Security isn't inherited, it's structured." Structured. I structured payroll systems for 25 years. But somehow I hadn't structured my own protection. Dinner began without me. No one invited me down, no one asked if I'd eaten. Through the heating vent in my room, I could smell rosemary chicken. The chicken I bought. I waited until the house grew quiet, plates clinking, laughter fading, front door closing. Then I walked downstairs. The table was still set beautifully. Crystal glasses half empty, wine stains on linen napkins. In the kitchen, leftovers were already packed away, in plastic containers, labeled for them. I opened the refrigerator. There it was, the same cheddar I had reached for earlier, still untouched. I stood there for a long moment. And here is where most people expect me to slam the door or confront Lydia or cry, But I did something else. I took the cheese, I cut a small slice, and I put it back exactly where it was. That was the first quiet move. Not dramatic, not explosive, but symbolic. Because that night wasn't about food, it was about ownership, and something inside me needed confirmation. The next morning, Lydia was unusually cheerful. "Thanks for understanding last night, Mom," she said over coffee. "Understanding what?" I asked mildly. She hesitated. "You know, presentation." "Presentation." "Of course," I replied. Evan avoided eye contact. And that told me more than anything else. Because men like Evan believe in financial leverage, and leveraged assets require clarity, which meant paperwork, which meant documentation, which meant I needed to check something I hadn't looked at in 2 years. Later that afternoon, while Lydia was on a conference call and Evan was at a site visit, I went to my closet. Behind a shoebox of old holiday cards, I keep a file folder. Inside are copies of everything important: bank transfers, insurance policies, tax returns, the deed copy, or at least there used to be one. I flipped through the folder slowly. Transfer receipt, there. Insurance acknowledgement, there. But the certified copy of the deed, gone. I paused, not panicked. Paused because documents don't walk away. I sat on the edge of my bed again, thinking. Replaying, when had I last seen it? When we refinanced last year, Lydia had asked me to sign updated documentation. "It's just cleaner this way, Mom," she had said. "Makes things easier for tax purposes." Cleaner, easier. For whom? That evening at dinner, I watched her differently. Watched how she spoke about equity growth. Watched how Evan mentioned market timing. Watched how Darlene suggested, if you ever upgrade, make sure everything is consolidated. Consolidated. I asked one simple question. "Lydia, can you remind me where we keep the original property documents? I'd like to organize my files." Her fork froze midair, just slightly. "They're in the study cabinet," she said too quickly. "Locked for safety?" "Locked for safety," I repeated. "Yes," Evan added calmly. "Better centralized." Centralized control. Interesting, I smiled again. And that smile, the same one from the refrigerator, unsettled Lydia this time. Because she realized something had changed. What she didn't know was this: I spent 25 years spotting payroll discrepancies. Tiny ones, decimal point ones. Human behavior has patterns, financial behavior has signatures. And when signatures change, it's never accidental. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't cry. I calculated $60,000, 2 refinances, 1 missing document, 1 locked cabinet, 1 dinner invitation withheld. And a sentence that still echoed, "Don't touch that." The food wasn't the boundary, the house was, and by the end, you're going to understand why the freezer went silent. But first, I needed proof. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I couldn't sleep, but because once your mind spots a discrepancy, it refuses to rest until it resolves it. For 35 years, I worked payroll for the city. Thousands of employees, millions of dollars moving in and out every month. If something was off by even 3 cents, my system flagged it. That morning, something was off by $60,000 and a missing deed. Downstairs, Lydia was already dressed for work, sleek navy blazer, hair pulled back tight, phone pressed between her shoulder and ear. "Yes, we need to secure long-term positioning," she was saying. "It's about asset structure." Asset structure. I poured myself coffee and watched her without watching her. Evan entered a few minutes later, adjusting his watch. "Market's shifting," he said casually. "Good time to consolidate." Consolidate, that word again. "Gloria," he added politely, "did you need something from the study yesterday?" Lydia's eyes flicked toward me, just for a second. There it was. They were already guarding the locked cabinet. "I was just organizing," I said calmly. "I realized I don't have a copy of the property deed in my files." Silence. Not dramatic, just a half-second too long. "Oh," Lydia said lightly, "I thought we handled all that during refinancing." "Refinancing? You handled it," I corrected gently. "I signed what you brought me." "It was routine," Evan interjected. "Rate adjustment." "Nothing substantial?" "Nothing substantial," I nodded, but inside I was building a timeline. 2 years ago, purchase. 1 year ago, refinance. 6 months ago, updated documentation. Last week, don't touch that. Patterns. When they left for work, I didn't go straight to the study. That would have been impulsive. Instead, I went to the garage. Inside a plastic storage bin marked tax records, I keep archived bank statements. I carried the bin inside and sat at the dining table. Transfer $60,000 confirmed. Wire details clear, memo line, joint property contribution. Joint, that word mattered. Because if it was recorded as a gift, the memo wouldn't read that way. I scanned through the refinance statements. Something caught my eye. The mortgage balance after refinance had increased, not dramatically, but enough to indicate cash-out equity. Cash out meaning they had pulled money from the house, meaning my initial contribution had been leveraged without my knowledge. I sat back in the chair, not angry, not yet, just focused. If my name had been removed during refinancing, it required documentation, which meant signatures, which meant I needed to see what I had actually signed. The study door was closed, the cabinet inside was locked, and I had no intention of breaking it open. Because once you break something, you look emotional, and emotional women lose credibility. Instead, I did something quieter. I called the county recorder's office. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I'd like to request a certified copy of the deed for 48 Glenhaven Drive." The woman on the phone asked for the property owner's name. "Lydia Whitman Ross," I said. There was typing. A pause. "Yes, I see the property," she replied. "How would you like to receive the copy?" "I'll pick it up in person." Always in person. Paper feels different when you hold it. I scheduled the pickup for the following afternoon. When Lydia returned home that evening, she was glowing. "Mom, Evan and I are considering some long-term repositioning," she said casually over dinner. "Repositioning what?" I asked. "The property," Evan answered. "It's smart to keep options open." "Options for whom?" Darlene arrived shortly after, unannounced as usual. "I told Lydia," Darlene began, settling into a chair, "this neighborhood is peaking. If they upgrade now, they'll maximize return." Upgrade, return, as if the house were a stock, as if I were not sitting there. "And of course," Darlene continued with a thin smile, "clean ownership structures make everything smoother." Clean ownership structures, I felt the pieces tightening. "Ownership structures," I repeated gently. "Yes, that's important." Lydia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She changed the subject. The next day I dressed carefully, simple cardigan. Neutral slacks, respectable, invisible. At the county office, I requested the certified deed copy. The clerk slid the document across the counter. I unfolded it slowly. Property owners, Lydia Whitman Ross, Evan Ross, only. No joint ownership, no co-ownership, no mention of Gloria Whitman. I read it twice, 3 times. The original deed, filed 2 years ago, never included me, which meant one of two things. Either I misunderstood entirely, or I was deliberately misled. I asked the clerk, were there any ownership changes filed during refinancing? She checked. There was a recorded quitclaim deed 6 months ago. Quitclaim deed. My heart didn't race, it stilled. Who signed it? I asked. She scanned the screen. It shows a Gloria Whitman relinquishing any claim to the property. The room felt quiet, almost distant. "I'd like a certified copy of that as well." When she handed it to me, I looked at the signature line. It was my name, the signature resembled mine, but something was wrong. The loop in the G was tighter than usual. The pressure marks were heavier, subtle differences. Most people wouldn't notice, payroll supervisors do. I walked out of that building into the cool afternoon air and stood on the sidewalk. They hadn't just excluded me, they had removed me, and either I signed something I didn't fully read, or my signature had been manipulated. Both were serious, but one was criminal. That evening, I said nothing. I watched Lydia scroll through her phone. I watched Evan review blueprints. I watched Darlene sip wine like everything was proceeding perfectly, because to them it was. They believed the structure was clean, consolidated, secured early, but they made one mistake. They assumed I wouldn't verify. The next morning, I made another call, this time to an attorney I found through a referral service. "Calvin Mercer's office," the receptionist answered. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding property documentation," I said calmly. "Is this about co-ownership disputes?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "And possible elder financial exploitation." There was a slight shift in her tone. "We can see you Thursday at 10 a.m. I wrote it down. When I hung up, my hands were steady. That night, Lydia brought up something unexpected. "Mom," she said softly, "have you ever considered downsizing your personal expenses? It would help long-term planning." Personal expenses, meaning me. I've always lived within my means, I replied. Evan cleared his throat. We just want everything optimized. Optimized, I smiled again, the same smile. It unsettled Lydia now because she could sense something she couldn't define. Is everything okay? She asked carefully. Yes, I said. I'm just organizing. And I was. Thursday arrived. Calvin Mercer's office was modest. No dramatic Dacre, no intimidation tactics. He was 68, silver hair, direct eyes, calm posture, methodical. I placed the certified copies in front of him. Original deed, quitclaim deed, wire transfer memo, refinance summary. He didn't react immediately. He read, slowly, thoroughly. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Whitman, he said evenly, did you knowingly sign a quitclaim deed relinquishing ownership? I don't remember signing one, I replied. But I did sign documents my daughter brought me during refinancing. He nodded. Were you given full explanation? No, he leaned back slightly. The memo line on this wire indicates joint contribution. The absence of your name on the original deed suggests misrepresentation. The quitclaim deed raises serious concerns. My chest felt steady, focused. Is this recoverable? I asked. It depends, he said calmly. If there was deception, undue influence, or forged signature, yes. But we need more than suspicion. We need evidence. Evidence? I thought about Lydia's phone, about the way she speaks when she believes no one is listening, about Darlene's strategic encouragement, about Evan's silence. There may be messages, I said slowly. Then preserve everything, Calvin replied. Quietly, do not confront, do not alert them. Documentation wins cases, emotion loses them. Documentation wins, emotion loses. I almost smiled. Payroll taught me that too. As I left his office, something shifted again. Not heartbreak, not rage, clarity. When I walked back into the house that afternoon, Lydia was in the kitchen. Mom, she said lightly, Evan's family is coming again Saturday. Let's keep things streamlined. Streamlined? Yes, I said calmly. I think things will be much clearer soon. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I held her gaze. Ownership structures matter, Lydia. The air tightened. Just slightly, she didn't respond. In that silence, that was the beginning of the real shift, because now I wasn't the guest, I was the auditor, and auditors don't announce themselves. They just gather proof. When you suspect something is wrong, your first instinct is to confront, to demand, to expose. But I had learned something long ago in payroll investigations. The moment you reveal what you know, people start correcting their tracks. And I needed Lydia and Evan comfortable, unaware, certain, so I said nothing. For 3 days, I cooked, I cleaned, I asked Lydia about her marketing campaign, I complimented Evan's new architectural renderings. I even listened to Darlene explain why modern families must think like corporations. Corporations? That word echoed in my mind, because corporations don't operate on emotion, they operate on documentation. Thursday afternoon, I returned to Calvin Mercer's office with something new, a memory. I think the quitclaim deed was inside a refinance packet, I told him. He nodded. Walk me through the day. I closed my eyes and pictured it. Lydia at the kitchen island, stack of papers. Mom, we just need your signature here and here, it's routine. Evan hovering nearby, Darlene in the living room. I remembered feeling rushed, not threatened, but hurried. Was there an explanation of a quitclaim? Calvin asked. No. Did you receive independent counsel? No. He tapped the document lightly. That strengthens undue influence. Undue influence. The legal term felt colder than betrayal. It's not just about forgery, Calvin continued. Even if the signature is yours, if it was obtained through misrepresentation, it can be challenged. So I might not have been forged, I said quietly. Just maneuvered? Exactly. There's something worse than theft. It's when someone makes you participate in your own removal. I went home that evening and found Lydia on the patio with her phone. She was laughing, not the tight professional laugh. The loose one she used with friends. I stepped outside quietly. She'll never question it, Lydia was saying. Mom hates conflict. She signs and moves on. My chest tightened. I didn't move. Once we upgrade, everything will be cleaner. No attachments. Cleaner, no attachments. Then she turned slightly and saw me through the glass door. Her posture changed instantly. Performance mode. Hey, Mom, she called sweetly. We were just talking about vacation ideas. Vacation? Interesting word choice. Later that night, I replayed her tone in my mind, not malicious, not screaming villain, just efficient. She believed she was optimizing her life. And I was an outdated asset. The next morning, I did something subtle. I left my phone on the kitchen counter while making tea. Camera app open, video recording, silent, not pointed at anyone directly, just capturing sound. Lydia and Evan were in the adjoining room. I don't like how she's asking about documents, Evan said quietly. She'll calm down, Lydia replied. She always does. And if she doesn't, she won't push it. She doesn't have the energy for a fight. Energy, that word settled heavy in my chest. At 70, they assumed exhaustion, but they forgot something. Experience requires less energy than emotion. Calvin had instructed me carefully, gather. Preserve, don't escalate. That weekend, Darlene arrived again. She brought wine and unsolicited advice. Young families need autonomy, she said pointedly. Older generations sometimes struggle to release control. Release control. As if I were clinging, as if I hadn't already surrendered $60,000. Control is an interesting word, I said gently. Documentation is more accurate. Darlene's eyes flicked toward Lydia, a silent exchange. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the dining table with the quitclaim deed under a lamp. I studied my signature. The loop in the G, the pressure in the W, the slant of the T. It was close. Very close, but not natural. It looked like someone tracing muscle memory or someone guiding my hand. The memory surfaced slowly. That refinance afternoon, Lydia standing too close, her hand resting near mine. Just sign there, Mom. A finger lightly tapping the line. Subtle, not forceful, but directive. Calvin had mentioned something else. Pattern persuasion can qualify as coercive influence. Coercive influence. They hadn't screamed, they hadn't threatened, they had guided. Monday morning, I received a call from Calvin. I reviewed the handwriting analysis, he said calmly. There are inconsistencies significant enough to warrant a formal challenge. My breath steadied. And we can file for a temporary injunction to prevent property sale or further refinancing. There it was, the shift, but Calvin continued carefully. Before we file, I need something else. What? Proof of intent. Intent. Because misunderstandings can be explained. Intent cannot. I thought of Lydia's patio call, of Evan's quiet concern, of Darlene's strategic encouragement. Intent wasn't loud, it was layered. That evening I waited. Lydia left her phone charging on the counter while showering. It buzzed. Message preview lit the screen. Darlene, make sure everything is finalized before year-end. Cleaner tax positioning. Cleaner, I didn't unlock it. Not yet. Instead, I placed my own phone beside it and waited for the next buzz. Another message appeared. Evan, have you scheduled appraisal? Lydia, yes, once Mom's off completely, we're clear. Off completely. That phrase echoed like a gavel. Off completely? I didn't need the entire thread. That sentence alone showed intent. I photographed the screen, not the full conversation, just the notification previews. Enough. When Lydia returned, I was sitting calmly at the table. Mom, are you okay? She asked cautiously. Yes, I said. I'm learning. Learning what? How leverage works. Her expression froze for half a second. You've been distant, she said carefully. Have I? Yes. It feels like you don't trust us. Trust. Interesting she used that word. Trust, I replied softly, requires transparency. She stared at me, then looked away first. The following day, Calvin prepared the injunction paperwork. He explained every step. This isn't revenge, he said evenly. It's restoration. Restoration, I liked that word. When I returned home, the energy felt different, subtly charged. Lydia was unusually attentive, Evan overly polite. Darlene absent? They sensed something shifting, because confidence looks different when it's gone. At dinner, Evan spoke first. Gloria, we're considering listing the house next spring, just exploring. Exploring. Interesting, I replied calmly. You might find that difficult. Silence. What do you mean? Lydia asked sharply. I mean, I said, maintaining eye contact, ownership structures are rarely as clean as people assume. Evan leaned back slightly. You've spoken to someone, not a question, a statement. Yes, I said. Lydia's fork clattered against her plate. You went behind our backs? No, I corrected. I went to verify my own. Her face flushed. You're making this adversarial? No, I said quietly. You did that when you removed me. That was the first time I said it directly, removed. The word landed heavy. Evan stood up. This is unnecessary, Gloria. Documentation rarely is, I replied. Lydia's voice rose for the first time since the refrigerator incident. You signed it? I signed what you told me to sign. You're accusing us of, I'm clarifying. And that's when something broke. Not loudly, but internally, because Lydia realized something critical. I wasn't confused. I wasn't passive. I was informed. And informed women are dangerous to plans built on assumption. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. Message from Calvin. Injunction filed. They'll be served within 72 hours. I stared at the ceiling. 70 years old. And beginning again, not as a mother, not as a guest, but as a litigant. Downstairs, I heard Lydia pacing. Evan speaking in hushed tones. They didn't know yet, but something in the air had shifted. The freezer would not be silent much longer. Because once legal notice arrives, optics don't matter, evidence does, and I had just enough. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday at 2:17 p.m. I know the time because I was standing by the front window when the delivery truck pulled up. Old habits do not fade. I still track details the way I once tracked payroll discrepancies. 2 certified letters, one addressed to Lydia Whitman Ross, one to Evan Ross. Return sender Calvin Mercer, attorney at law, I signed calmly. The delivery driver wished me a pleasant afternoon. I almost smiled at the irony. I placed both envelopes on the dining table. Centered, aligned, unavoidable. Then I went upstairs. Because the first reaction is always the most honest one. Lydia came home at 5:48 p.m. Her heels clicked across the tile. Purse down, keys in the bowl. Routine, then she saw them. Silence. A different kind this time. Not curated, not professional, not rehearsed. Heavy. Mom, she called, voice already tight. I let the weight of paper settle, footsteps upstairs, faster. She didn't wait for permission to enter my room. What is this? She demanded, envelope already torn open. It appears to be a temporary injunction, I said evenly. You filed something against us? I filed something for myself. Evan came up behind her, reading quickly. His jaw tightened. You're freezing the property until ownership is clarified. This is insane, Lydia snapped. You're escalating this for no reason. No reason, I asked quietly. You signed the documents. Everything was legal. Legal and ethical are not the same. Her breathing sharpened. You went behind our backs. I verified my position. The word hung there, verified. They retreated downstairs, speaking rapidly in low voices. I did not follow. Instead, I waited, because escalation reveals more than confrontation ever could. An hour later, the house went quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard the freezer door open. A sharp suction sound. The hum of cold air escaping. Footsteps stopped. Silence, not the earlier silence. This one was different, longer. I walked slowly to the top of the stairs and looked down into the kitchen. Lydia was standing in front of the open freezer, still, one hand gripping the door. Inside, on the second shelf where the frozen vegetables used to be, was a large clear freezer bag. Inside that bag, a certified copy of the original deed, the quitclaim deed, the refinance withdrawal summary, a copy of the wire transfer showing joint property contribution, and on top, a simple white card in my handwriting. It read, "Documentation wins." She did not move, she did not call my name, she did not accuse, she did not yell, she just stared. Because for the first time this was no longer theoretical, no longer emotional, no longer something she could spin as misunderstanding. It was structured, preserved, frozen. Evan stepped into the kitchen behind her. "What are you looking at?" She didn't answer. He leaned past her shoulder. His posture changed, not dramatic, but tightened. "They were in the freezer?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Lydia said finally. Her voice was flat. "Why the freezer? Because 2 years ago she told me not to touch what wasn't mine. So I chose the coldest, most controlled space in the house to hold the truth. Because paper preserved in cold does not warp, and neither does clarity." Lydia slowly removed the bag. The white card slid slightly. "Documentation wins." She read it twice. Then she closed the freezer, gently, and that was the moment she went silent, not angry, not defensive, silent, because silence means recognition. She understood something in that moment that no argument could have explained. I was not confused, I was not emotional, I was not reacting, I was prepared. She turned and saw me standing at the top of the stairs. We held eye contact. No shouting, no accusations, just acknowledgement. You planned this, she said quietly. No, I replied. I preserved it. Evan exhaled slowly. This didn't have to go to court. There didn't have to be a quitclaim, I answered. Lydia placed the freezer bag back on the counter. For the first time since this began, she looked uncertain. Not of the numbers, of the outcome, because now she knew something critical. This was no longer a conversation she could manage. It was documentation she could not undo. Later that night, Darlene arrived, indignant as always, but even she sensed something had shifted. The confidence was gone. In its place, calculation. The next morning, Lydia approached me carefully. This doesn't have to go further, she said. That depends, I replied. We can settle quietly. How much? 40,000. I almost smiled. Interest, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. You've really spoken to a lawyer? Yes. But she wasn't shaken by the legal move. She was shaken by the freezer, because that moment was not legal, it was psychological. She had opened something she believed she controlled, and instead she found structure. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on something important. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it documents. Sometimes it places truth in the coldest part of the house and waits for someone else to open the door. And now the freezer was silent. But the courtroom would not be, because once documentation surfaces, exposure follows. And exposure changes everything. Once legal papers are filed, something changes in a house. Conversations lower, doors close more often, smiles become measured, and every movement feels watched. The injunction had done what it was meant to do. It didn't win anything. It didn't prove fraud, it simply froze the board. And people who rely on movement panic when things freeze. Lydia stopped bringing up upgrading. Evan stopped mentioning market timing. Darlene stopped visiting as frequently. But silence does not mean surrender, it means recalculation. 3 days after the envelopes arrived, Lydia approached me in the kitchen. She wasn't angry this time, she was polished. Corporate calm. Mom, she said gently, Evan and I have spoken to our attorney. I assumed you would. He says this could take months, maybe longer. Yes, and it will be expensive. That's usually how consequences work. Her jaw tightened. We can still settle? I'm listening. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. 50,000. The original amount, no interest, no acknowledgement, just restoration of principal as if time, stress, and deception had no cost. You removed me without disclosure, I said evenly. You extracted equity, you positioned to sell, that has value implications. You're treating this like a transaction, she snapped. It became one the moment you filed a quitclaim. That word again, quitclaim, it echoed differently now. Evan entered mid-conversation. This isn't healthy, he said calmly. Families don't litigate. Families don't conceal, I replied. He exhaled slowly. We did what was practical. For you, for the household. I was part of that household. There it was, the truth neither of them wanted to say. In their structure, I was temporary, a transitional asset. Not a permanent stakeholder. Later that afternoon, I met Calvin Mercer again. He reviewed the settlement offer without visible reaction. They're testing your resolve, he said calmly. What happens if we proceed? We request full financial disclosure, he explained. Refinance documents, appraisal records, equity withdrawals. If undue influence is proven, the court may nullify the quitclaim. And if it's not, then we pursue reimbursement with interest. Interest. That word comforted me more than revenge ever could, because interest acknowledges time, and time was what they thought I didn't have. Be prepared, Calvin continued, for character arguments. Meaning, they may portray you as confused, forgetful, emotionally reactive. I smiled faintly. I ran municipal payroll audits for 35 years. I know, he said, but judges don't know that yet. That evening, Lydia's tone shifted again, different strategy. Emotional appeal. Mom, she said quietly after dinner, why didn't you just talk to me? I did, not like this. You didn't leave room for conversation. She looked genuinely conflicted for a moment. I thought I was protecting us. From what? Instability. Instability, the word she fears most. When your father died, I said softly, I kept our home paid off because stability isn't created by expansion. It's created by security. She didn't respond, because deep down she knew something. She had chased leverage, and leverage requires risk. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Darlene arrived alone, no perfume announcement. No wine, just quiet resolve. She sat across from me in the living room. Gloria, she began carefully, you're damaging Lydia's reputation. Reputation isn't evidence, I replied. She works hard. She's built credibility. Then transparency should not frighten her. Darlene leaned forward. You're 70, court battles are stressful. I'm aware. Wouldn't you rather peace, peace? That word is often offered when someone benefits from your silence. I prefer fairness, I said. Her expression hardened slightly. You're making them look predatory. I'm not making them look anything. Documentation speaks for itself. She stood slowly. You could end this quietly. I wasn't removed quietly. And there it was, the real fracture, because Darlene's loyalty was not to truth, it was to optics. That night, Lydia didn't come home until late. When she did, she looked tired, not angry, not defensive, just worn. Evan thinks this is going to ruin us, she said suddenly. Ruin what? Our financial trajectory. I looked at her carefully. Lydia, when you convinced me to sell my house, what did you believe would happen? That we'd build something bigger. And I would. You'd live comfortably. As what? She didn't answer because the word was inconvenient. Dependent. The following week, discovery requests were filed. Calvin formally requested refinance paperwork, appraisal documentation, equity distribution records, communication regarding ownership removal. The house felt smaller after that. Not physically, but emotionally, Evan worked longer hours. Lydia was on edge, and one evening I overheard something that shifted everything. I was passing the study when I heard Lydia whisper sharply. You said it was airtight? Evan's voice was lower. It was supposed to be. Then why is Mercer pushing so hard? Because your mom isn't as passive as you thought. Passive, that word lingered. I walked away quietly, not hurt, confirmed. They had built their plan on an assumption that I would not verify, that I would not challenge, that I would not act. Underestimation is the most expensive miscalculation. 2 days later, Calvin called. They've disclosed refinance withdrawal, he said calmly. How much? 82,000. My breath paused. Withdrawn 6 months ago. So my 60 was leveraged. Yes. Where did it go? Down payment on an investment property in Evan's name. There it was. The expansion plan, secured early, without my knowledge, without my consent, without my inclusion. I felt something then, not rage, clarity. You see the pattern, Calvin said. Yes. We now have intent and material benefit. That strengthens the case. Intent, benefit, pattern, all the elements of structured exploitation. That evening I confronted nothing. I asked nothing. I simply watched Lydia scroll through real estate listings. Watched Evan review investment projections. Watched them operate as if expansion were inevitable. But now there was something different in their movements. Caution, because leverage collapses when scrutiny enters, and scrutiny had arrived. That night, Lydia stood in the kitchen long after Evan went upstairs. Mom, she said quietly without looking at me, did you ever think maybe you just don't understand how modern finances work? I looked at her carefully. I understand leverage, I said softly. What you misunderstand is loyalty. Her eyes met mine. For a moment, she looked like the child who once asked me to check under the bed for monsters. But monsters grow up too. And sometimes they look like strategy. The court date was set for preliminary hearing. 3 weeks away, 3 weeks of living together, 3 weeks of quiet war. And in quiet wars, the calmest person usually wins. Because emotion burns fast, documentation lasts. The freezer had gone silent that first night. Now the entire house felt like that moment. Cold, still, waiting, but the real silence, that would come in a courtroom. When the judge reads numbers, and numbers don't lie. The house felt different the week before the hearing. Not louder, quieter, like everyone was conserving energy for something inevitable. When people realize control is slipping, they don't always panic. Sometimes they perform harder. Lydia began overcompensating, posting smiling photos, networking events, captions about building legacy and protecting generational wealth. Generational wealth. The phrase sat heavy in my mind. Because generational wealth built on deception fractures faster than glass. 3 days before the hearing, Calvin called. I need you steady, he said calmly. They've responded aggressively. In what way? They're arguing voluntary relinquishment. Claiming you understood the quitclaim, they'll likely suggest confusion or memory decline. There it was, the pivot I expected. Age, subtle erosion, not calling me incompetent outright, that would look cruel, just suggestive. I have 35 years of payroll audits, I said quietly. I know, Calvin replied. And you will speak clearly, let the documentation carry weight. Documentation, always back to documentation. That night, Lydia approached me differently than before, not defensive, not transactional, soft. Mom, she said gently, I need to ask you something honestly. I nodded. Do you really think I would intentionally hurt you? It was a dangerous question because it wasn't about legality. It was about identity. I think, I said carefully, you convinced yourself it wasn't harm because you believed the outcome justified the method. Her face changed. You're making me sound manipulative. I'm describing behavior, she swallowed. We were trying to secure our future. By removing me from it, silence, then something unexpected. She sat down, not across from me, beside me. I felt pressure, she admitted quietly. Evan wanted expansion. Darlene said we needed clean positioning. I thought you'd never challenge it. There it was again, underestimation. I didn't challenge because I trusted, I said. She looked down, and now I verify. The next morning, Evan confronted me directly, no politeness, no polished tone. You've escalated this beyond reason. Reason would have included transparency. You're risking everything we've built. I didn't build the investment property. His jaw tightened. You knew about that? Yes. For the first time since this began, I saw something close to fear in his eyes. Where did you get that information? Disclosure documents. He exhaled sharply. You're turning this into something it doesn't need to be? No, I replied calmly. I'm turning it into something it always was. He stepped closer. You could have just asked. And you could have just told me. That was the fracture, not money. Not signatures, trust. 2 days before the hearing, Darlene returned, but she didn't speak immediately. She observed, watched the tension, then finally said, "This will divide the family permanently." "It already has," I answered. "You'll regret this?" "No," I said softly. "I'll regret silence." She studied me carefully. "You're not the woman I thought you were." "No," I agreed, "I'm not." And that unsettled her more than anything else because she had categorized me. Soft-spoken, grateful, passive, those labels no longer fit. The night before court, the house was unnaturally quiet. Lydia stayed in the study reviewing documents. Evan made calls behind closed doors. I sat at the dining table with my own folder. Wire transfer, original deed, quitclaim, refinance withdrawal, investment property purchase record. Each page felt like weight, not heavy, just final. Calvin had instructed me. Answer only what's asked. Don't embellish, don't react. I wasn't afraid of the judge. I was afraid of seeing Lydia on the opposite side because courtrooms don't just divide assets. They divide narratives. The morning of the hearing, Lydia dressed impeccably. Gray tailored suit, neutral heels, minimal jewelry, professional victim. Evan wore navy, composed, strategic. I wore a simple cream blouse and black slacks, unremarkable, intentional. In the car, no one spoke. When we entered the courthouse, the air felt colder than expected. Fluorescent lighting, muted conversations, neutral territory. Calvin met me at the entrance. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes." Inside the courtroom, Lydia avoided my gaze. Evan kept his posture rigid. Their attorney, polished, younger, aggressive, shuffled papers confidently. When the judge entered, the room shifted. Calvin presented first, clear, concise. Mrs. Gloria Whitman contributed $60,000 toward the purchase of this property under the understanding she would hold ownership interest. Subsequent refinancing included a quitclaim deed, allegedly relinquishing her rights. We contend that deed was obtained under misrepresentation and undue influence. No drama, just structure. Then the opposing counsel stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Whitman signed voluntarily. She resided in the home rent-free. This is donor's remorse, not fraud." Donor's remorse, interesting phrase, as if I were regretting generosity. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, "did you understand you were relinquishing ownership?" "No, Your Honor," I answered steadily. "I believed I was signing refinancing documentation." "Were you given independent legal explanation?" "No." "Did you receive compensation for the quitclaim?" "No." "Did you benefit from the refinance withdrawal?" "No." The room felt still. The opposing counsel shifted. But she lived in the property as an owner, Calvin interrupted calmly. Under that understanding, then came the critical moment. Calvin introduced the refinance withdrawal documents. $82,000 extracted. Investment property purchased. In Evan's name, the judge's expression changed slightly. Mr. Ross, he said evenly, was Mrs. Whitman informed of this equity withdrawal? Evan hesitated. No. That single word altered the atmosphere, not explosive, but irreversible. Lydia's composure wavered. Opposing counsel attempted to redirect. It was marital property decision-making, involving equity partially derived from Mrs. Whitman's contribution, the judge replied calmly. Silence, the kind that hums. Then the judge spoke again. I am not ruling today on full nullification. However, I am extending the injunction. No sale, no transfer, no additional leverage until full evidentiary hearing. Not victory. But momentum. Lydia exhaled sharply. Evan's jaw tightened. As we exited, Lydia finally looked at me, not angry, not defensive, just shaken. Was this worth it? She asked quietly. Yes, I answered. For money, for clarity? She stared at me. You've changed. No, I said softly, you just never saw me clearly. That night the house felt colder than ever, but something else had changed too. The illusion of control was gone. They had assumed I would never bring structure into conflict. They forgot structure is my language. As I lay in bed, I replayed the moment Evan admitted I wasn't informed. That wasn't just legal advantage, it was exposure. Because once intent and benefit intersect without disclosure, stability fractures. And for someone who built her identity on securing early uncertainty is the most destabilizing outcome of all. The freezer was silent again that night, but not because I felt small, because the house itself felt suspended, waiting. The next hearing would determine ownership, and ownership is never just about property, it's about respect. And respect, once withdrawn, is harder to reclaim than equity. The full evidentiary hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after the injunction was extended. 6 weeks of living in the same house. 6 weeks of controlled politeness. 6 weeks of walking past Lydia in hallways like we were distant colleagues instead of mother and daughter. If you've never lived in a home where a legal case is unfolding in the background, let me tell you something: silence becomes strategic. Lydia stopped raising her voice. Evan stopped making offers. Darlene stopped giving advice out loud. They were preparing, so was I. Calvin Mercer met me twice before the hearing. Today isn't about emotion, he reminded me. It's about pattern, intent, benefit. Intent, pattern, benefit, 3 pillars. If they attempt character framing, he added, stay steady, don't defend who you are, the documents do that. I nodded. I wasn't afraid of the courtroom, I was afraid of seeing Lydia testify. Because truth, once spoken under oath, leaves no room for denial. The morning of the hearing, Lydia didn't speak to me at breakfast. Evan didn't look up. The air felt dense. When we entered the courthouse, I noticed something new. Darlene was already there, seated behind Lydia, hands folded, watching, protective, not of justice, of image. The courtroom was fuller this time, not crowded but attentive. Calvin organized his binder with quiet precision. Across the aisle, opposing counsel whispered to Lydia. She looked composed, professional, prepared. When the judge entered, something shifted in me, not fear, finality. Calvin stood first. Your Honor, we are here to determine whether the quitclaim deed executed by Mrs. Gloria Whitman was obtained through misrepresentation and undue influence, and whether subsequent financial activity demonstrates material benefit without disclosure. Clear. Concise, structured. He walked the court through the timeline. $60,000 wire transfer with memo, joint property contribution. Original deed excluding Gloria. Refinance 6 months later. Quitclaim signed same day. $82,000 equity withdrawal. Investment property purchased solely under Evan Ross's name. Then he paused. And at no point was Mrs. Whitman informed that her ownership interest would be extinguished while her contribution was leveraged. The opposing attorney rose. Mrs. Whitman is an intelligent woman, a former payroll supervisor. She understood documentation. That was the angle. If I was competent, I couldn't be misled. If I was misled, I must be incompetent. A subtle trap. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Whitman, please take the stand. I stood, walked carefully, sat, hands folded. Mrs. Whitman, the judge began, when you signed the quitclaim deed, did you believe you were relinquishing ownership? No, Your Honor. What did you believe you were signing? Refinancing paperwork. Did anyone explicitly tell you the document removed your rights? No. Opposing counsel approached. Mrs. Whitman, you worked in payroll for decades. You read contracts daily. Yes. So you're telling this court you signed a document without reading it? I signed what was presented as refinance documentation by my daughter. So you didn't read it. I trusted her summary. The attorney smiled faintly. Isn't that negligence? No, I replied calmly. It's trust. The room shifted slightly. He pivoted. You lived in the property rent-free for 2 years. Isn't it fair to say your contribution was compensation for housing? No, why not? Because housing was presented as co-ownership. Not charity, he paused. You have no written agreement guaranteeing ownership. I have a wire memo stating joint contribution, not legally binding. Intent matters. He stopped pressing. Because pushing too hard makes cruelty visible. Then came the turning point. Calvin called Evan to the stand. Evan walked with controlled posture, professional, measured. Mr. Ross, Calvin began, was Mrs. Whitman informed that the refinance would include a quitclaim deed? Evan hesitated. No. Was she informed that equity would be withdrawn? No. Did she consent to that withdrawal? No. Did she benefit from the $82,000 withdrawal? No. Silence. Calvin continued. The investment property purchased, whose name is on that deed? Mine. And Mrs. Whitman's? No. Was she consulted before that purchase? No. The judge leaned forward slightly. Opposing counsel objected. Relevance. Overruled. Because benefit without disclosure forms pattern. Then Lydia was called. This was the moment I had feared. She sat where I had sat, composed, voice controlled. Miss Ross, Calvin began, did you tell your mother she would be included in ownership? At the time, yes. And why was she not included on the original deed? We intended to update later. But instead, a quitclaim was executed removing any claim. Yes, why? For financing clarity. Did you explain that clearly? I assumed she understood. You assumed. Yes. Did you ever explicitly say, Mom, you will no longer own this house? No, there it was. No, Calvin didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize. He just let the answer sit. Opposing counsel tried redirect. Miss Ross, did you intend to harm your mother? No. Did you believe you were acting in the household's best interest? Yes. And did you believe she would be financially stable regardless? Yes. Belief. Intent. Outcome. The judge listened without expression. After closing statements, the room grew quiet. The judge reviewed notes, then finally spoke. This court recognizes that Mrs. Whitman voluntarily signed the quitclaim. However, evidence demonstrates that material information regarding equity withdrawal and ownership implications was not disclosed. The pattern indicates undue influence through misrepresentation. My breath slowed. Therefore, he continued, the quitclaim deed is hereby nullified pending full restitution. Mrs. Whitman shall either be reinstated as 50% owner of the primary property or reimbursed her $60,000 contribution with proportional equity appreciation and legal fees. The room felt suspended. Lydia's face went pale. Evan stared straight ahead. Darlene's hands tightened. The judge continued. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in enforced sale. Gavel, not loud but final. We walked out quietly. No celebration, no drama. Outside the courthouse, Lydia finally spoke. You just dismantled everything, she said softly. No, I replied, you did. Evan looked at me differently now, not with irritation, not with dismissal. With recognition. You could have lost, he said. Yes, but you didn't. No, Lydia's voice broke slightly. Was it worth destroying us? I didn't destroy you, I said gently. I refused to be erased. That sentence stayed with her. I could see it because this was never about money. It was about visibility. The ride home was silent, but not tense. Resolved. That night the house felt different again, not cold, not hostile, transitional. Because within 30 days, ownership would shift, or money would transfer. Either way, the structure they built on assumption was gone. As I stood in the kitchen, I opened the freezer once more, not defiantly, not symbolically, just casually. And I took out a container. No one stopped me. No one said, don't touch that. Because ownership had shifted back into balance, and balance feels quiet. Upstairs, Lydia was crying, not loudly, not theatrically. just the soft, private sound of someone confronting consequence, and I felt something unexpected, not triumph, grief, because I hadn't just reclaimed property, I had exposed my daughter. And exposure changes relationships permanently. Next, this wouldn't be about court, it would be about aftermath, because winning legally doesn't automatically restore family. And what Lydia would ask me next would test something deeper than documentation. Winning in court is loud for a moment, but what follows is very quiet. 30 days, that was the deadline. 30 days for Lydia and Evan to decide whether they would reinstate my ownership or reimburse my full contribution plus appreciation and fees. 30 days of living in a house where the power had shifted but the damage remained. The first week no one spoke about it, not directly. Evan stayed late at work. Lydia worked from home more often, her office door closed. Darlene stopped visiting. Silence became reflection, and reflection for some people is more uncomfortable than confrontation. On the 10th day, Lydia knocked on my bedroom door. She hadn't done that in months. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't defensive, it was uncertain. I nodded. She sat across from me, hands folded like she had seen me sit in court. "I've been running numbers," she began. Of course she had. Numbers were safer than feelings. "If we reinstate your 50% ownership, refinancing becomes complicated. Selling later becomes complicated. Everything becomes complicated." I waited. "And if we reimburse you, we'd have to liquidate the investment property. Possibly take a loss." Still numbers, still strategy. "What do you want?" she finally asked. There it was, the question beneath everything. "What do you want?" "I want autonomy," I said calmly. She frowned slightly. "That's not specific." "It is to me." I stood and walked to the window. For 2 years, I lived in a home where I felt like a guest. I don't want to own half of something that requires constant negotiation. I want something that is entirely mine. Her eyes widened slightly. "You're choosing reimbursement." "Yes," she swallowed. "That means we'll have to sell the second property." "That was never my decision to make." Silence settled between us. Not hostile, just honest. "I didn't think you would fight," she admitted quietly. "I know. I thought you'd prioritize keeping peace." "I prioritized keeping dignity." That landed differently. She looked smaller somehow, not physically. "Internally, I was trying to secure our future," she said again, but softer this time. "And in doing so," I replied, "you jeopardized ours." The deadline approached quickly after that. On the 27th day, Calvin called. "They've agreed to full reimbursement plus appreciation and fees. Total transfer will be completed by certified check in 3 days." His tone remained calm, methodical, strategic, but I heard something beneath it. Respect. "You did well," he added. "I did what I had to," I replied. When the check arrived, it wasn't dramatic. No courtroom, no audience, just a sealed envelope handed across the dining table. Evan slid it toward me. His movements were slower than usual, controlled. "This resolves all ownership claims," he said evenly. "Yes." He nodded, then something unexpected. "I underestimated you," not an apology but acknowledgement. "I know," I said softly. Lydia didn't speak during the exchange. She watched, eyes heavy. When I stood to leave the table, she finally said, "What happens now?" "Now," I replied, "we live with what we chose." That afternoon, I met Calvin at his office to deposit the funds and finalize documentation. He reviewed everything carefully. "As clean a resolution as possible," he said. "Thank you," I told him. "You protected yourself," he corrected. "I just structured it." Structure, it had always been my language. That evening, I sat alone in my room and did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a fresh notebook. Blank pages, untouched. I wrote one word at the top: rebuild, not revenge, not vindication, rebuild. Within 2 weeks, I found a modest condominium 15 minutes away. 1 bedroom, bright kitchen, large front window, nothing extravagant, but entirely mine. When I signed the deed, I read every line slowly. Not because I didn't trust, but because clarity is strength. Moving day arrived quietly. No arguments, no tension, just boxes. As I carried my final suitcase down the stairs, Lydia stood in the hallway. "I didn't expect it to end like this," she said. "Neither did I," she hesitated. "Are we done?" That question carried more weight than the court ruling ever had. "We are changed," I answered carefully. "That doesn't mean done. But trust doesn't regenerate overnight." She nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix this. You don't fix it, I said gently. You rebuild it, and rebuilding takes consistency, not intention. She absorbed that. Evan stood behind her, quiet, measured. Take care of yourself, he said. I plan to. I walked out without dramatic goodbyes because sometimes dignity is quiet. My new home smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The first night I sat on the floor with a cup of tea, much like I had years ago after Arthur passed. But this time I wasn't grieving loss. I was reclaiming space. Ownership feels different when it's unquestioned. Over the next few months, something unexpected happened. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything was clear. I arranged my furniture slowly, planted herbs on the balcony, reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. I even joined a community financial literacy group, teaching older women how to read refinancing documents, how to protect contributions, how to ask the uncomfortable questions before signing anything. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once signed without reading was now teaching others to verify. One afternoon, Lydia visited, alone, no performance, no polished makeup, just Lydia. I've started therapy, she said quietly after sitting down. I nodded. That's good. I realized something, she continued. I framed security as control. I thought if I secured everything early, I'd never feel unstable again. And did it work? No, her voice cracked slightly. It made me lose the one person who never made me feel unstable. That hurt, because beneath everything, she was still my daughter. I'm not gone, I said gently, but we move forward differently now. She nodded. I want to earn back trust. That takes time. I know. And for the first time, I believed she did. Our relationship didn't snap back into warmth overnight. It evolved. Slower, more honest, with boundaries. Evan remained respectful but distant. Darlene never addressed the case directly again. Image had been disrupted. And image-conscious people dislike revisiting cracks. But here's what I learned through all of it. Being soft-spoken does not mean being weak. Trusting does not mean forfeiting discernment. And peace without boundaries is not peace, it's surrender. When Lydia once told me not to touch food in my own house, I smiled. Not because I was powerless, but because I knew something she didn't. Silence is not absence of strength, it is sometimes preparation. Today, when I open my freezer in my own condominium kitchen, there is no hesitation. No permission required, no quiet calculations, just ownership. And ownership is not about property, it's about self-respect. If there is one lesson I would leave for every woman listening, it is this: love deeply, support generously, but never sign away your security in the name of harmony. Harmony built on imbalance will always fracture. Stability secured through deception will always collapse. And dignity, once reclaimed, changes how the world treats you. The court case ended, the house changed hands, money moved, but the real shift happened inside me. I stopped being underestimated, and I stopped underestimating myself. That was the true victory, not the check, not the ruling. The clarity, and clarity is something no one can quietly take from you again.